Hello, everyone. My name is Natty, and I am an admin from Women Against Feminism. Um, and I am here today talking to a self-described incel. Um, so, what we're going to try and do on Women Against Feminism YouTube channel is do some interviews and start uploading more content. It's kind of been a dead channel for a while. I've put on a few random live videos I've done where I've just been talking to the camera. Um, but hopefully we're going to do some more interesting content. So today we've got William, who I am talking to in response to all the media attention um, regarding incels. So I don't know if you guys are aware. You probably are. Maybe a few months ago, we had an incident in Canada with a guy who killed um, 10 people, unfortunately, and left 14 injured. His name was Alec Minassian. And he did a post on Facebook um, just prior to doing the crime, saying that the incel revolution has begun. And as a result, all of the mainstream media has been uh, showing attention and focus and attacking the incel community. And there's been lots of conflation going on with men's rights guys and MGTOW. And if you're familiar with MGTOW and men's rights guys, if you're not, then I can go into it a little bit more later on. But at Women Against Feminism, we aim to stand up for women who are against feminism, be a clear voice, and say, tell the world that feminism doesn't represent us. And we also seek to understand the male side of things, because most of the reasons why our members in our Facebook group are against feminism is because they believe in men's rights and they believe that men are being shafted and demonized in our culture. And they want to change the law. They want egalitarian principles to be brought back and women not to have special privilege. So if we can say hi to William. Are you there, William?
Yep. Hello.
Hey, so William he's got his real photo, but he's not going to do a video. It's just going to be me, and he's going to stay with an avatar photo. But it is actually his photo. I'm just saying that he's not going to turn his video on. So let's get started. William, just tell us your age and where you're from, and just to introduce yourself, really.
Yeah, so I'm 27 years old. I'm from the USA, live in the DC area. I admin a forum called Incelistan, which is a fairly large incel forum, fairly active. We do keep getting shut down, so it's hard to build up our numbers too high. We're the only incel forum I think that lets in women and men who aren't celibate. So it's a bit of a different community out there. I've been working with a friend of mine named Jack to sort of represent the incel community to the media. And yeah, like you said, I am a self-described incel, so I think I've been that way probably forever. I am doing a bit better, like dating wise, since all the media, but other than that, I'm still like I would still call myself that.
Okay. So I think we can start by just talking to you about your experience, and then we'll go move on to what's been happening recently with the media, with Alec Minassian and all the references to Elliot Rodger. And there's also a third guy that was a little while back as well.
George Sodini is one of them. Yeah.
That's it, yeah. But let's talk about you first. So you're 27 and you live in the USA, in the north of the USA. And you said you've been an incel forever. Would you say that started from, what age did that start from? And when did you start
Um,
thinking about it in that kind of way? When did you apply the term to yourself?
yeah, well, I started using the word last year when there was a forum called r/incels, which is now banned on Reddit. And I used to use that infrequently. I thought it was kind of a gross place because I thought that people there were sort of radicalizing each other. But
Yeah.
I was sort of upset that they got shut down by the Reddit community. They got banned basically for, I think it was hate speech or something like that. And I felt bad for the people that were using it, and I thought that I somewhat identified with the forum. So because of that, because I got sort of angry at the fact that the largest incel forum was being banned from the internet, I thought, well, I identify with these people. I'm noticing the word incel is being used a lot as a slur, as like a bad word when it's a pretty innocent word, I think, on like just the word itself.
Mm.
So I thought since all this stuff is and also I was get in like some like left wing Facebook forums and other forums like that, people were using like even just like male virgin is like an insult, and so I just wanted to help out and sort of do my part to maybe improve the lackluster image of the incel um, brand, if you can call it that. And I'm not just by myself, but with some of my friends. And I don't think that we've been successful in that, but we spent a lot of time sort of working our way up in the various communities and trying to change what was going on. But as far as like my personal life, I think that I've identified with like being involuntarily celibate or having a bad romantic life since I hit puberty. And but as far as a romantic life, like probably since like first grade, I felt like I was always at the bottom of whatever like social or romantic hierarchy existed.
Okay. And have you ever had a girlfriend?
No, well, not really. I've had long distance relationships, if you and last one I had, we called ourselves boyfriend and girlfriend. So I sort of yes, sort of no. I mean, it's all been virtual.
Okay.
And that was all recently, probably because of the media.
Mm.
But before the media, no, and then after the media, long distance.
And did you have any kind of one-off experiences? Obviously, I'm not asking for like specific details, but any kind of just
No,
one-off
no,
encounters, anything like that?
no. So I was as far as celibacy goes, I was a virgin until last year, and I lost my virginity to a prostitute, and I made a video about that about a year ago on a YouTube channel that I have, and it got very popular because people found the story interesting. But
Mm.
sort of like went viral. But yeah, it was not the best experience ever, but I felt good doing it. But yeah, no, but to answer your question, yeah, no like one off experiences.
Okay. And so when you started to go through puberty and you noticed all your peers starting to hook up or having boyfriend and girlfriend, and becoming romantically involved, what what was going on for you then? What um
Sure.
how was it for you at that particular time?
Yeah, so that would have been maybe I don't know the exact year, but probably maybe 8th grade, maybe 7th grade. But
Yeah.
it was whenever everyone else was going through it. I remember at that time I was in a very, very small private school. There was a very large bullying problem that was going on in my class with about 20 people. None of the girls in the class had any interest in dating anyone whatsoever, and no one ever dated ever the entire time I was at that middle school. And that continued into high school. Yeah, and that continued into high school where I was in a like a gender, what you call maybe like gender separated, where the guys and the girls didn't were- didn't have classes together, even though we were in the same school. It was a these are all religious schools, and yes, you weren't allowed to hold hands with a girl in the school. That was against the rules. You weren't allowed to like kiss a girl at school. That was against the rules. So there was very little to no dating actually going on in my high school either. And then at probably maybe senior year of high school is when some people actually started dating, but it was sort of mostly just like the jocks and their friends, and that was about it. And almost everyone that I grew up as friends with, they had their first girlfriend in college. Like virtually everyone. I can't think of anyone that had a girlfriend before college that was my friend because of the schools that I was in. So the difference between me and my friends was that I um did not find a girlfriend in college or afterward. So
Okay.
that
You went
yeah.
to college, yeah?
Yeah, yeah.
What did you study?
I studied engineering at first, so that explains some of it, and then also, after that, biology, and I think that maybe if I wasn't basically, I was put on an enormous amount of psychiatric medication after, a suicidal thing, or, like, I forget what it was, like, I wound up in a mental hos no, 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 what was it? I became suicidal my freshman year of college, um, and after that, they put me on a bunch of psychiatric medication, which made it so I couldn't drink. So
Mm.
after that happened and went back to college, every time I went to a party, and then admit sometimes the girls came up to me and showed interest in me and say, "Hey, do you want to drink?" I would say I can't because I don't know, I would have like stopped breathing or something. So uh,
Oh,
uh,
so that sounds like quite strong medication. Was it? I mean, you don't have, obviously you can choose to how much you want to share about this stuff, but was it like if it was just general SSRIs, then you can drink a little bit, but maybe not too much, right?
yeah, so
But
it
if
was
it's stronger
benzodiazepines.
than that, it's different.
I was on a bunch of stuff. The benzodiazepines made it so I couldn't drink. So, stuff like, Xanax, Valium, Klonopin, that class of drugs, that's like alcohol basically, and it's very, very bad to drink on them. If you have you I think you have a Valium problem in the UK, I think maybe. Not entirely sure. You know what that drug is?
Um, yeah, well, I don't know. I don't know that much about it, but I think we do have a problem with Valium, but I don't think we don't. I don't think we have as much as a problem with some of these prescribed drugs that America does. So I've heard a lot about opiates and other
Yeah,
kind of mental health related drugs compared to the UK. I'm not saying we don't have an issue here, but as far as I'm aware, it's worse in the USA. That's just my perception, but I could be wrong. Yeah.
I see. And in my description of why I've been celibate, a lot of people have noted to me in the past that I don't talk enough about personal failings, and that's a good point. But I just I don't know. I've my the general like feedback I've gotten from friends and family is that, and from therapists, because I've been in therapy a long time, is that like I admit I'm not entitled to a partner, but like they don't see a reason why I shouldn't have a partner. So uh, like the sort of like massive personality flaws haven't been pointed out to me, so it's hard for me um, to comment on that. Like
Mm.
I know that right now I'm like the one personality flaw I know that is like meaningful with my interactions with women is that I'm pretty zombified now from medication. Some people like to hear that from me, like what I think of my own personality flaws that might have prevented me.
Right. Okay. Well, probably would have got to asking you about that eventually. But for now, I guess the way I see things in terms of the incel community and some of the overlap, I would say, is with MGTOW. Um, but you can tell me a bit more what you think about that. My opinion about that. If you grew up and you went to a private school and it was highly religious and no one was dating, um, in my just hearing that from you, if the culture wasn't everyone is dating, um, then the people that are naturally not going to be that confident, naturally going to be lower in the kind of marketplace of dating, are definitely not going to be dating. Yeah. So the only people that even be close to it are going to be the ones that are naturally attractive to everyone, right? Would you
That's what
agree with
happened.
that?
That's what happened. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So you said that by the time you got to say senior high school level, well, that would be what age, like 16? Is that about right?
Senior of high school here is like maybe 17. Yeah, yeah,
17. Okay. Because in the UK, we've got secondary schools. We call them high schools as well sometimes, but they call them secondary schools. And then once they get to 16, they usually they can stay at the school, but then they're in what's called sixth form, and then or they can go to a college, a sixth form college, or a bigger college that has a sixth form level within it. Um, so if you have someone say, "Oh, when I was at college in the UK, we're not really talking about university yet. We don't really tend to use that word for university." Just just the small differences in culture between the US and the UK. So yeah, so okay, so that makes sense because once you're getting to that age, you're almost 18, you can start telling your parents, I can do what I want, more or less.
yeah.
Um, and just out of interest, what type of religion what type of Christianity or religion was it that the schools were?
They they were either officially or unofficially Catholic, and I'm also Catholic, so that was it. Yeah,
Okay. Um, it's just really surprising to hear that because in my mind, even the most religious and Christian schools in the USA, I know that um, in my mind they would still have teenagers frolicking about, but from what you're describing, it wasn't happening.
it really was not until senior year of high school. I can think of maybe two or three people out of like 10, 14 or 15 guys in my class that actually started dating. And that's really about it. Yeah.
Was there a strong culture from the adults saying, that were the girls encouraged to need to be virgins before marriage? Was there what kind of was it in that way?
Yeah.
Just
What
sort of
kind
a
of
little bit more.
yeah, what kind of message were we getting from the community and from our parents
Yeah,
about
that's a good
dating?
way of putting it.
Yeah, so, well, from the church, it was pretty obvious if you've ever known sort of like the Catholic Church's position on that. It's sort of what you said, which is wait till marriage. Sex and masturbation are like horrible, horrible, horrible things to do before marriage. And actually, I was in during the time that I was in high school, I was going to this weekly like sort of men's religious group where people my age would go and sort of have these like round table discussions about our week every single week, and it was like a social group. And the main thing that they would do at this social group um, was a group confession. So every single week we'd have group confessions in front of our friends, and the first thing that they'd ask us is if we've masturbated, and then if we've had any like sexual contact, and if we did, they would like verbally like punish us sort of. So
Wow.
that so
And did
that was
people lie about that? I mean, maybe not.
I'm sure some people did. I don't know. I didn't like talk about it outside of that because like the reason we wanted to go to it wasn't for the group confession. It was for like basketball games that we would do before or after the group confessions. So none of us really liked that aspect of it, and it was only afterward that a lot of us talked to each other and said that was kind of weird. But but yeah, that I I just remember that part of my life. I kind of forgot about it.
Okay. I'm really curious because I'm from London in the UK and I didn't go to a very religious school. I'm not from a very religious community. So I am genuinely ignorant about, what the rules and procedures are in those kinds of environments. Obviously, I know people. So it's really interesting to hear what it was like because when I was at school, I went to a girls' school, but as soon as the girls would say, I don't know, like 14, 13, 14. There was a boys' school down the road, and they were walking down the road after school to go and meet the boys from the school down the road. And the boys from down the road would come and meet the girls, in the street.
Yeah.
Um, so, it's a completely different culture that an environment that I come from. I'm thinking about it. Um, and so I guess even though you're saying that people weren't really doing that out of school either, because I guess the community was probably keeping an eye on everyone. Is that right?
I'd say that's a good question. Like, why weren't people sort of taking the initiative and using their own willpower to go and pursue the opposite gender? I'm sure the girls were doing that. To be honest, I'm pretty sure they were dating. There was just something going on where the guys in my classes, which was what I brought up earlier, weren't dating. There's something going on where they um, I don't know. I don't know why we weren't dating in middle school and high school, like, why we didn't make the extra effort to go and pursue women outside of, school.
Mm.
I'm trying to think of why we didn't do that.
Well, I mean, if you're in the Catholic community, you probably maybe weren't thinking about it yet, and some people would say that's a good thing, and that there's no rush to do it. I'm just trying to apply it to my experience and the general experience of America.
Well,
People
here's
seem
one
to be
thing.
rushing to date younger and younger these days. That's all.
Yeah. One thing would be that I just, there wasn't sort of a large group of women, like, let's say, like, here's the thing, like, for myself, in middle school and high school, especially since 1st grade, I sort of felt like the, girls in my classes were just sort of, like, hostile to all the guys in my classes, and, just to have wanted to have nothing to do with us and didn't wanna date us, which was true. They didn't actually end up dating us, and, maybe that's just, like, cooties, maybe that's just, like, an irrational, like, way that I'm analyzing this, but it always felt like the girls just, like, were giving us strong, like, fuck off signals,
Mm,
since 1st grade, and sort of I learned through that if that actually did happen, that's how I felt it. If that actually did happen, that sort of made me feel like I wasn't sexually valuable and I wasn't like a sexual like or romantically valuable like before puberty. So I always just assumed the way I thought of myself as a romantic or sexual being was that I was not worthy of a woman. Like I wasn't good enough for a woman. So I just in the back of my head, I think around that time I was thinking like there's no point in going and looking for one because I'm not worthy. I thought of myself as like gross, ugly, like not good enough for women. And I think that, like I said before, that was born from sort of these fuck off signals I was getting from girls since 1st grade, where they just did not want to date the guys in my class. Not that might be a bad way to analyze it, but that's just sort of how it played out.
and were they hanging out with you guys as friends? As uh,
No,
no.
No, every day, every class, every school I was in since 1st grade to college. Now this changed dramatically in college. I think it does for a lot of people, but until college, I don't know if you call it cooties or whatever. That the girls were just in their own spot, and the guys were in their own spot, and we never ever mixed. Only people that ever sort of mingled were the top athletes and the more popular girls, and that was about it. I mean, really, it was that severe because I know in some public high schools, um, obviously in the United States and where I was, there was more dating going on in middle school and high school, and there were a lot more people that weren't jocks and that weren't what you call Stacy's or whatever like mingling and dating. So yeah, it was just an unusual circumstance I was in.
Okay. So yeah. So would you say that your that circumstance you was in was a little bit unusual, as you just said, maybe a little bit extreme compared to the norm? What do you think the norm is in general in America? I mean, maybe you
Well,
don't. Well,
so it's I wouldn't I might not be able to give you the best answer. I just know that in America, most people lose their virginity around senior year of high school,
hmm
and that is higher than some countries. That's lower than other countries. It's probably higher than the UK, uh, higher age than the UK.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
interesting. America is an interesting place because you've got very extreme ends happening. You've got very religious communities, extremely liberal communities. And I would say in the UK, it's not, we don't have such extreme cultures in the same way as the US. Obviously, there are some small pockets of like Jehovah Witnesses or whatever, but it's not, the culture's different. I would say in general. The last time I read data about this, it was about 16 to 17 people lost their virginity on average. But I do think there are higher numbers of people losing their virginity at say 15 in the UK compared to the US.
Yeah.
But don't quote me, I could be wrong. But that's what when the last time I read about it, that was what
Yeah, but I've also read that your country might have a similar incel problem. There was an article that came out recently that said like 1 in 8 people in the UK are virgins at the age of 26 in the
mm.
UK. I don't know if that sounds true, but that was an article that came out recently. So I think that
And did it mention the gender of the people, or
I
did it
I
not
ass- I
specify?
assume it was equal between both genders. I don't remember though. Yeah.
Well, there has been some attention in recent times suggesting and data suggesting that compared to, so you're 27, I'm 32, um, and I'm a millennial. I would say you're a millennial, but
Yeah.
you're obviously slightly younger. But the generation below, so that's um,
Gen Z,
Gen Z, and then the one below that, which is coming up now,
Gen Y, I think. Yeah.
Gen Y, that they are actually having less sex than the millennials and the Gen X when you compare them at the same times in their life. Um,
Yeah.
so there could be uh, a case where you're saying that young people in general are having less sex overall, not just the rise of incel numbers. Well, we can talk about that in a minute because I'm sure you know a lot more about that than I do. But which is interesting considering our culture is highly sexualized compared to say when I was younger and when Gen X was younger, the generation above me.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but people are having less sex in general. The young people.
Absolutely.
Do you think that's right? Like,
Oh, yeah, everything that I've read because, one of my hobbies now since I've become, like, an unofficial spokesperson for incels is making sure I know, like, the sort of trends that are going on, and that's absolutely true. Everything I've read has suggested that, um, for example, millennials are having less sex than Generation X, like you said, and Generation Z is having less sex than millennials, and Generation Y will probably have less sex than Generation Z, and that this is a worldwide phenomenon, that can be chalked up to many different things.
yeah.
But some countries are reproducing at less than replacement rate, and it's a problem for some countries. That's not it's not reaching such a problem in the United States and the UK that the government has to worry. But
Well, I
it
don't know
is.
about that. We are kind of at that level.
Oh,
It's
really?
well, it's supposed to be 2.1, 2.11 is the replacement level. And I think the UK is at 1.8, but again, don't quote me. This is just from memory. Um, and the only saving grace, as it were, is our immigration levels. And obviously, um, that's highly political to talk about immigration levels, but the indigenous population is not reproducing at 2.11.
Oh, there you go. Yeah. Yeah, yeah,
Uh,
so it's definitely a worldwide, phenomenon. It seemed the worst in Japan, obviously, where, like, half of, uh, people in their 30s are virgins, basically.
yeah. Well, and I don't think it's quite reached that level here or in the USA, but it could head that way, perhaps. So just to go back to your experience of high school, um, and just the general experience is that people are having less sex, and they are the ones that are having relationships, and let's so put them together. You've got romantic relationships and sex. Um, it's basically the people that are generally the most attractive. So the alphas, the Chads and the Stacys, as we'll just call them that. And everyone else is kind of happening for them once they get to college. Yeah.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Okay. So when you got to college, what was your experience regarding the opposite sex and the environment changing completely? Because you mentioned that that's when you started taking medication. So I guess you might want to talk about that too.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sort of embarrassed, not particularly proud of my dating experience in college. I think that if I were to go back in time, I would have been more aggressive in my dating life. But basically, yeah, when I went into freshman year of college, I didn't know anyone there at the college, and it was a different sort of environment than I've ever been in. I went to a large public college, 23,000 students, so it was a lot of opportunity for me there. I did start trying to, as soon as I got there, I did start trying to go to parties and to social events. As soon as I started doing that, I realized that I just did not have the social skills to I felt like I didn't have the social skills to connect with people on a level that would lead me to a romantic relationship, and I really did want that. Like, that was, like, sort of forefront in my mind, was trying to, like, find a partner, not a partner, but like someone to date. Um, but mostly ended up happening was I kept going to these social groups and clubs, and, like, every week I was probably a member of about 4 different social clubs, and I would just sit there and just, like, not talk to anyone, because I was afraid of people and afraid of what they're thinking of me, and I definitely did not think of myself as sexually valuable. I thought of myself as very ugly,
Mm.
um, and, uh, and I actually thought I was so ugly that I started, trying to uh, um, I maybe had maybe like 1 or 2 like pimples going on, but I thought it was this horrible acne problem, so I started trying to remedy that through like holistic means and sort of uh, weird ways of treating acne, and it actually made my acne problem much, 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 much worse to the point that I was having like this huge cystic, disgusting, disfiguring acne because I was trying to get rid of 1 or 2 pimples, and and I was
So I
doing it
guess
the
you were
wrong way.
you were buying products. Were you buying products that were probably not suitable for you, and they were just making the situation worse?
Exactly. Yeah, I was just doing it the wrong way. I was buying the wrong products. But that's just an example of how I thought I was ugly. I wasn't sexually valuable, and I was using very extreme, what I consider extreme measures to sort of fix what I thought was a problem. But looking back at photos of myself in freshman year of high school before the huge disfiguring cystic acne, I was like, I looked fine. Like, I could have gotten a girl. It's fine. But at that time, I saw myself as a lot of people have body image issues at that point in their time. It's not unusual. But I think that mine was probably worse than most people's because I was just obsessed with it. And the medical term for that maybe is body dysmorphia. I don't know, but that's very common in these incel communities. Are guys thinking that they're very, very ugly, and then us telling each other that we're not ugly. That's just like probably the main theme of the incel communities, in the at least in our like conversations with each other, is like uh, ugliness, male ugliness, feelings of being ugly, stuff like that.
Yeah, that's something I have picked up from reading about the communities and talking to people. Um, and it's something that we've traditionally just concentrated on when it comes to young girls, young teenage girls, and not really as a society, not really concentrated on guys feeling that way. And I know the guys feel that way too. And it's kind of like we know about anorexia and body dysmorphia and kind of um, people that overeat, and it's generally regarded as a female problem.
Yeah, yeah.
And I so just to go back to high school just for a second. So when when the girls were basically socially excluding themselves from you guys, because you said that your friends or these guys, other guys around, were also experiencing not socializing with them. on in large numbers. Would would you say that what was the main message that they were actually communicating to you? Was it religiously based? Was it culturally based? Was there elements of feminism going on there?
There
What's your opinion on it?
well, there definitely was an elements of, feminism. I think there's definitely a huge connection between feminism and, what's happening here. That's sort of a theoretical discussion, but yeah, uh what the girls in my class were doing in high school, was sort of, like, actively, avoiding and also sort of bullying the guys in my class, and,
Can you give me an example of some bullying?
sure. So, they would, for example, they would come up with nicknames for me that were like sort of derogatory. The girls would. It was different. It wasn't all the girls involved with this, but like I'd say, um, if there are probably like 12 girls in my class in middle school and maybe 15 girls in high school. I'd say maybe like a third of them would be dating like sort of the jocks, and then
Mm,
the rest would be and then maybe two or three would be involved in bullying guys, and then the rest would be maybe open to dating sort of the average guys, but were sort of hostile to them and did not get excited at the idea of a guy being interested in them. So once a, gu- if it, once it was known that a guy was interested in a girl in the class, that would go that would go around that would make the rounds, and that gossip would go around, and we'd hear back from the girls basically if we didn't approach them directly that they're not at all interested, and they find that gross. So it wasn't. I mean, uh, they were just. I mean, like evolutionary psychology would say that like women are the selectors, and they ultimately make the final choice in these sorts of things, and I sort of believe that. So if we're to follow that sort of theoretical route, they just didn't choose us. Like they did not find us worthy, and the area that I live in is extremely wealthy. This is the second wealthiest county in the entire United States. So I think it's possible this also might be an incorrect analysis that the girls in my class were looking at us, and but we're also looking at guys in their 30s and thinking, well, these guys in their 30s have their life together, they have a job, and they're also extremely wealthy. These guys in my class,
even were dating older guys out of school,
I'm sure some of the girls were doing that, dating guys that were
or at
older than
least
them.
fantasizing that they could, even if it wasn't happening.
Yeah, I'd assume that's what was happening, and almost all the girls that have been dating me since the media stuff has been girls in school that are of age, like college age girls. So I mean that's just something that happens. Is girls like there's definitely a large
Older
section of girls
guys.
that like to date up. I couldn't hear you. What?
Sorry, I was talking over you. I said generally they want to go for older guys.
Yeah, but I'm not entirely sure that's what happened when I was in middle school and high school. I just what I assumed was happening. On my best guess. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, my opinion is that those girls are probably in quite a controlled environment because it's a religious community. So their parents were probably keeping a closer eye on them than, say, another community. Yeah, and a public school or in a non-religious community. That's just my just assumption.
Yeah.
Um, Perhaps they were a slightly different community, and any opportunity presented itself, they would have gone for an older guy turning up and wanting to date one of them. Because I know, having gone to a girls' school that was a secular school in a fairly multicultural, very multicultural area, actually. Like my experience is quite unique as well because I grew up in a very multicultural area where white British people are now a minority,
Mm.
um, and it's London. So the turnover of students and people around is quite high compared to a small community, and not everyone is got a different dynamic. It's a bit like growing up in New York or LA or something like that, right? And so I know that if some guys who are say 21 or even maybe 18 to 25 or whatever age just started turning up at school, and just hanging out with the girls and seeing, maybe someone's older brother or cousin or something, that they would attract attention, and they would be dating someone eventually. So I don't think it's out of my remit to suggest that that probably either did happen or it would have happened if the opportunity was there a bit more with some of those girls. Um, the other question I have is, um, were there any girls who were kind of socially awkward, who the guys weren't really interested in, or at least who maybe, were different to the norm of the other girl groups?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. The answer for middle school, high school, and well, any school up to college was I would say no, and that seems unusual. But ever since I started like getting interest from girls in the last few weeks, from my vlogging and media and stuff like that, I've come to the realization that there are like nerdy girls that exist out there. Like there are girls that don't like fit in, and I didn't know that before because I never met any of them. But they were coming to me because they were interested in me because they saw me and they related to me or whatever. And I didn't know that they were. I just wasn't aware that there were girls that were into as many nerdy activities as some of the nerdy guys that I knew, and I've been meeting these girls in the last few weeks, but I never knew any girls that were like super nerdy or that were sort of ostracized, like the girls I've been talking to recently in
Mm,
school.
mm.
Back when I was in school, I just didn't. They definitely were not there. So
Maybe
yeah,
maybe maybe in your environment they didn't there weren't that many of them because obviously it just depends on the school.
a very small sample size there. Yeah, so that like 12 or 13 girls in all my classes until college. Yeah.
Um, but I'm just gonna, again, my opinion. I think that they do exist, but in my observation, there's generally less of them than there is of the male equivalent.
Yeah, and
Um,
there's a high demand for them too, especially because there's so few of them, and there's a lot of nerdy guys out there. So what they're telling me, the girls I'm talking to recently, is that yeah, a lot of people are pursuing me, like you know, um,
yes, you're
I'm in demand
kind
here.
of.
Yeah.
I don't want to use the word unicorn, but
That that might apply. Yeah, I just don't know how many of these girls exist in public schools. Yeah.
they're a niche. There's not many of them around. That's true. And I would say, as I said, I went to an all-female school, and so my experience is that they were, obviously, I went to a more female school, so there was more females to compare this to. They definitely existed, but I can imagine that in a mixed school, they because they might be kind of geeky or nerdy or socially awkward or have a disability, something that makes them just not overly confident in social situations for whatever reason.
Mm.
Um, they when you compare them to, say, you've got a class of 25 girls, then you're going to have the comparison, and the is going to change. It's all contextual, right? So
Yeah.
say you had a mixed school that had 25 students. One of the geeky girls is not actually going to be seen as that geeky in that school, right? Because there's less girls. But in a girls' school, she would. Do you see what I mean?
Um,
So say
go ahead.
you've got 25 girls in a class, and you've got the most alpha mean girls type girls at the top, and then it goes in a kind of marketplace situation. Think about all the different types. But if you say you had 10 girls in a mixed sex class, the geekiest girl in the 25 in the all girl class is not actually going to be seen as that geeky in the mixed class.
And what is the reason for that, do you think?
Does that make So I
Yeah,
think it's all textual. When you're talking about, I think a marketplace is the best way of describing it because this is very stuff, right? But um, you know, you've got your most popular alpha girls, and in one context she's really alpha, and in another she's not
I
more
see.
alpha than her.
Yeah,
You
well,
know what I mean?
the one thing
So
I can say about that is like I'm gonna try to like build an image of a geeky girl here. Like maybe she's into anime, she's into video games, she's into um and she's ostracized. Like those are like
yeah,
common traits I've noticed. That none of those girls existed in any of the schools that I went to. I know they exist in large public schools. So
yes,
girls that are like into anime, video games, and that are bullied or ostracized, yeah, they're definitely out there. And I don't know how many like what percentage they would be in a large public school, but yeah, they did not exist in the schools that I went to. Comparing an all girls school to towards a mixed school. Um, I mean, yeah, that it's hard for me to comment on that. I'm not entirely
yeah.
sure how.
No, no, I might be describing this quite badly. Sorry, but I'm just trying to say the point is that um, I think these girls exist, but I think in general there's lower numbers of them than there is of the guy equivalent. And I think it really is contextual of the environment because I can think of numerous girls who would be ostracized, socially awkward, or geeky or whatever. But in a different environment, they wouldn't be that bad. They wouldn't be seen as that. It wouldn't be as bad for them because there's less girls to compete with.
Yeah,
Um, and girls tend to, especially in the teenage years, they tend to convene in groups stronger than guys do. Um, there's a really strong female in group preference, like the peer. The peer is very important. It's very important for guys too, but for girls, they hang in packs, and so you might actually have a female who isn't as outgoing or isn't as bitchy or isn't as mainstream in some ways, like certain, they might not like the same music or something like that as the other girls, but they feel like they need to hang out with them to
mhm,
fit in and to protect themselves.
yeah,
And it's interesting because when I was at school, I was definitely ostracized. But I wasn't really geeky. I've never been geeky in the way that you describe. I was never into anime or anything like that. However, I hung out with people like that. Yeah.
yeah,
But I was definitely ostracized from the other types of girls, the more popular girls or the more alpha girls.
yeah,
Um, and I think to myself that probably in a different environment, I might not have been ostracized that much. Yeah.
I see what you're saying now. Yeah, yeah,
So it's that's how you got to think about it, and I think that's part of some of the obsession with the Stacys and the Chads when you see the way that some of the incel conversations happen in the forums. Um, is this what I'm talking about? There's probably a term, but I can't think of it right now. Where it's just highly contextual depending on the environment where you are in the social pecking order. Yeah, in one environment you're probably pretty
yeah,
low, and the other environment you're kind of high. And you're saying to me that now that you've been having media exposure and talking out and now you're getting more female attention, you're getting attention from the females that are can relate to you,
yeah,
who you in you when you were younger didn't really know existed. So
exactly.
it is really an interesting element to all of this that gets a bit lost when it's being misrepresented. Um, anyway, so that was just sorry, just going off on a tangent because I just wanted people to sort of understand the environment that people are coming from and how they can apply it to there and compare it because there's never an apple to apple scenario that's exactly the same. So we have to try and talk about trends really than anything else. And um so you're in college, you're studying engineering, which is a quite a male-dominated course generally, and if it does have females on it, those females are, I don't know, there's not many of them, right? Is that fair?
That's correct, yeah.
Okay. And you did make an attempt to go in social groups that were outside of that. Like you said, you used to go to different meetup groups and things.
Yeah, 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 a bunch of them, yeah.
Okay. And um, just from what you're describing, you were saying that you used to sit there and not really say anything to anyone. Would you say that you are like an introvert, kind of naturally socially awkward, or do you think that your experience made you like that, and you're not actually you probably are not like that naturally? What
Well,
would you
that
say you
there's an interesting, sort of, way that I'd say, like, incels frame this and that not non-incels frame this. So a lot of incels would frame it as the social rejection begets the social anxiety. So the ostracization create for people that have been diagnosed with social anxiety or that are shy. A lot of incels would say that this starts after ostracization and it starts after romantic rejection and it's born from romantic rejection and ostracization. I think a lot of like what you call normies or like normal people, whatever, people that are successful in relationships or just like people that give advice to incels, they say, no, 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 it's the other way around. You're like born with this genetic predisposition to anxiety and shyness. And then after that comes your romantic problems and everything like that. And it's
Hmm.
just you're born with this like disease. And then it's your job to fix your shyness so that women could be interested in you. And then again, the incels come around and say, no, no, it's not our job to fix our shyness because our shyness was born, or maybe like so the incels would say, like our shyness was born from our romantic rejections and our social rejections. So we would rather society focus more on like anti-bullying campaigns and stuff like that, rather than putting everyone into therapy for shyness, which in and of itself isn't necessarily a bad trait if it's mild or moderate. But yeah, but to answer your question, shyness. I mean, I've been shy since the first grade, and I've wrestled with that question whether or not the shyness came before the romantic and social ostracization, or if the social and romantic ostracization came before the shyness. But whatever it was, I have been shy, very shy since first grade, and
Okay.
yeah.
This is a very this is probably the core about the incel community, the core issues, really, isn't it? Would you say that you were shy or introverted or both or whatever before first grade? Uh,
No,
and
no.
it no. So when do you think it changed for you?
Well, a lot. I've heard a lot of people say that sort of like the social pecking order starts in first grade because that's when girls and guys start getting romantic feelings for each other, and
Mhm.
that sort of matches my experience. So in kindergarten and preschool, I had no problems talking to girls, and I was friends with a lot of girls and tons of them, and I would spend every day with girls, and it was no problem. So starting in first grade, guys and girls, including myself, started feeling not all of us, but like mild romantic interest in the other gender,
Yeah.
and that didn't exist in preschool and kindergarten.
So
So
how do you
yeah,
think you were? How were you in the latency period, which is like kind of 9 years old? That's the period just before first grade, really. Um, how were you with girls then?
I don't
How was
remember
it
the
for you?
un unfortunately, I don't remember the exact ages here. I just know that, before it was sometime around 1st grade, that the problem started, and I noticed that there was these social hierarchies forming, basically, like, uh, the Chads and Stacys sort of dynamic started forming around, that time. Unfortunately, I can't tie it to an age.
Yeah.
I don't remember.
And you don't really remember what it was like. You're saying it was fine up until first grade, basically, in general.
Yeah, 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 and then in fir
Not specifically, say, when you were about 9 or 10 years old.
yeah, and then so what I noticed happened was maybe in the 1st grade, there were guys that, that sort of became popular and guys that, were sort of actively working to, keep other guys out of their social circle, and these guys were more successful with, were like more popular with girls than other guys,
Mhm.
and so that stratification between the less popular guys and the more popular guys became like sort of emerged, and where there was this sort of class of guys who just were not seen as the popular interesting guys, and then there was like a group of 4 or 5 guys that basically did all of the social interaction with the girls, and that were sort of like looked up to as like superior. Um, I remember there was a kid I wanted to be friends with in first grade, who was one of these maybe like it's weird to call like first grade kids as Chaz, but he was like a popular guy, and he definitely sort of didn't want to be my friend, whereas in preschool and kindergarten he probably would.
Right.
So so that there was this sort of stratification, that's hard to describe because it was so long ago, building in first grade, and, I think it's most I don't know, but I think it's because of the romantic, sort of thoughts that some first graders like, it's very, very vague romantic sort of feelings you might develop in first grade, just sort of like, "I find this girl cute, I find this guy cute." That's
It's
about
more
as
like,
far as it goes.
you suddenly started to notice each other in a slightly different way. It doesn't mean you're gonna start dating or anything. It just means that your hormones are coming out and suddenly you notice that girl is cute or that guy's whatever,
Oh, yeah, that's a good point. That you start noticing, like, who's more cute than others, for example, right? So that part might not exist in preschool and kindergarten, where, like, there's definitely people you have preferences for, because maybe in preschool and kindergarten, like, I saw probably all girls and guys as equal on, like, there wasn't this romantic or sexual way to stratify
Yeah.
people, and in first grade, there's definitely girls that are more, valuable than other girls, on this like romantic, not a sexual, but a romantic sphere.
Okay, so I guess going back to what you were saying about whether the social awkwardness and the shyness is an inherent behavior in someone like you, um, and then everyone's responding to that, or it's created by this this hierarchy developing. Um, so, I mean, what do you think about that? Do you think that in a different environment you would have become more sort of socially outgoing, or do you think that maybe you would have been similar to how you are now?
Unfortunately, I can't answer that question. I do know that
Oh,
there is a an argument in the between the incels and what you call like anti-incels about the role of confidence in dating and interaction. So incels would say that uh, or and not just incels, but a lot of people would say that confidence is born from successful interactions with your peer group, and other like anti-incels or people that are critical of the incels worldview would say no. Actually, confidence is something that you build yourself, and through that confidence that you build yourself, you use that for successful interactions. So I'm more sympathetic to the incel view of it, where you really only get confidence from successful interactions with women. So once women start picking you, that's when you start becoming confident and not shy and stuff like that. So I feel like in my past, if I had women that were sort of pursuing me, which is unusual, women don't usually pursue, but if or maybe if I had women that sort of gave me an open or like sort of like let me know that they were somewhat interested in me, that sort of thing would breed confidence and in myself. And I
well,
didn't
maybe
have that.
the girls in your school just socialize with you a bit more. Yeah,
Right, or
you have
that
the
too.
opportunity to develop it.
Yeah, and when I say this, I can if there were people that weren't a part of your community watching this that were like critical of the worldview that incels have, I could see them thinking, well, right now you're blaming everyone but yourself for your problems. Um, and I would just respond to that like this is the best way I can think of it. Really, I don't, you know.
Yeah, I think I'm more sympathetic to what your opinion on it as well. I think it's a mixture of both because there are people that are naturally introverts and people that are naturally extroverts, and it comes naturally to some people, and some people have to work harder at it. But the social environment is very important in facilitating it. And so if you've got, segregated students, like the girls are just not interested in socializing with them at all. Then where are you going to have the opportunity to develop it? You have to keep fighting to go over there and be like, hey, notice me, interact with me, let's be friends, whatever. I mean, that just makes it worse. I think what I'm really interested in is comparing how that social situation is now compared to the past, whether or not the incel community has grown compared to the past. I think it has, but I haven't seen any numbers to prove that. Um, and obviously, being in Women Against Feminism, I think it very much has to do with all the messaging coming out that on a very basic level that masculinity is bad, boys are to be seen as threatening. Um, you know,
Yeah,
they
yeah,
don't want
that's
to assert
that's
themselves. The girls are now in charge of all social situations. In the past, we've had a mixture of things. We've had, the genders were segregated quite a lot. I mean, I think in the UK there weren't mixed schools for quite a while. It's a fairly modern thing to have mixed schools. They
mm,
didn't start mixing until they were, say, in the last year of school, say age 16, 17, or in when they went to university and college. That wasn't actually the norm, and it seems to be more the norm now. Um,
yeah,
so there's that point, but generally, like, if society's messaging is saying to girls, look, you need to be fighting the patriarchy, getting out there, getting your career, concentrating on yourself, becoming a strong, independent woman. Even in the more kind of traditional religious communities, they're getting that kind of messaging too. Because I've observed, say, for example, in the Mormon community, that even though they are quite traditional, um, they are quite gynocentric in the way that they treat women, the way that they give women more social power. Yeah.
yeah,
Um, so we've got a combination of all these different things happening, and so I think it's quite unfair when I just see people saying, it's only because you're that socially awkward guy who hasn't managed to develop confidence yet, and it's up to you all on your own to do it. And it's like, when did we start thinking about people in this way? I've always thought that when you're someone needed help with confidence or whatever, self-worth, that it was supposed to be a group effort. Yeah.
yeah,
And I actually think that in the past, men, despite the fact that they're more individualistic in the way that they develop as men compared to women, there were more opportunities for them to develop in groups with other men, so that, well, by the time they are an adult, that do have a degree of confidence with them. But I don't know, things have changed. Um, it's really interesting. We've got the rise of group identity politics and feminism, but at the same time, we've got this culture of just blaming the individual for absolutely everything in their life. I don't think it's
yeah, yeah, yeah,
very.
yeah.
And just one example for myself. So I mentioned earlier that I went to a girls' school and I was ostracized and I was bullied quite a lot. I would say that I was being an easy target because I didn't really fit in with certain groups. It's quite a multicultural school, so you had all the black girls, all the white girls, the Asian girls. Then you had girls who were into certain subcultures like goth and metal and nerdy. And I wasn't really like them. I wasn't really like anyone. And in the end, I I actually became friends with this girl who was an ex Mean Girl. Yeah.
Mm,
She got completely shut out of all of her group that she used to lead. everyone went against her and she became friends with me. Yeah.
Mm,
And I just had my little kind of group of friends that were we all had something similar where we weren't really easy we didn't really fit in with the other groups, right? And she I guess she became the kind of more dominant not more dominant person in our group. And for years I was, I kind of tried to please her. I was a bit of a people pleaser. Even though I have a quite strong personality, I kind of just kind of went along with her and our other friends. But I do vividly remember being about, I don't know, 18, and we went to a nightclub. And before this night, and it's really weird, I obviously made an effort to be attractive, going to nightclubs. We're 18, we're in London, we're doing what we're doing. And um, I always felt like I was kind of second best behind her or third best behind someone else or whatever. And suddenly, um, after that night, I had this thought, and I just thought, I don't really care anymore. Um, I why do I care where I am in this kind of mental, pecking order? I'm just going to do whatever I want, and I just suddenly felt very confident, and my self worth just went up quite a
mm,
lot. And I'm not entirely sure what it was. It might have just been someone gave me attention, and it made me feel good, or maybe something else I achieved in my life was going well. I can't really remember, but I remember thinking that, and things changed for me after that. And as I said, it's not the same at all in terms of our situations or anything. But what I'm saying is that um, if if even someone who was nowhere near an incel has spent years thinking that they are in a particular place in the social pecking order, and then suddenly they've changed and developed. So you've got that kind of natural progression that might happen with most young people, and then who've had the opportunity, who socialized with guys and girls, quite outgoing as a person, and even I felt, you know, inside I felt I wasn't worthy compared to some other people around me, and then suddenly I was like, oh fuck them, I don't
yeah,
care anymore. And it's like I can't imagine not having the opportunity to develop in that way. So if you're someone who hasn't had these kind of, you know, these opportunities to do that, it's yeah, I just, my heart goes out to it really because then it can drag on for a very long time. Yeah.
yeah, and I'd say, like, maybe after, you leave college, you sort of have infinite opportunity to say sort of like "fuck you" to the, social pecking order because there's you're not in these sort of closed academic environments where saying "fuck you" to the pecking order will bring you bullying. So, for example, after college, if you decide I'm just going to ignore the social order and just go out and do whatever the hell I want in public, there seems to be less social punishment for that. Um,
Mm,
whereas if I were to do that in school, if I were to say, "Ah, I don't give a fuck about the social pecking order, I'm just going to go over and say whatever the heck I want to any of the girls, any of the guys," I would have gotten some social retribution from that, or some particularly negative interactions with girls that would have been pretty bad. Maybe it would have been a good idea for me to do that. I don't know, but I have noticed that recently, especially in the last few months, that sort of the whole process of identifying as an incel and coming out as an incel, coming out is like uh, show like I don't know, whatever, identifying as an incel. It is in a big way sort of saying fuck you to sort of taboos surrounding male sexuality and sort of your pecking order as a sexually undesirable male. and a lot of people tell you to shut up and no, this is not your place to do that. Just don't talk about this stuff. So I feel like now I'm doing sort of what you did back in that bar situation, is
Yeah.
where I'm sort of saying I don't give a fuck about what's taboo to say about sexless men. I'm gonna go out and just say whatever the hell I want, and and I started doing that through my vlogs, and I got a lot of comments in my vlog saying like, why are you talking about this? This isn't something that's appropriate to talk about in public. But ever since I decided to do that, to sort of just not care about the pecking order or not care about the sort of rules governing what men low on the social hierarchy are allowed to say, I have been a bit more successful. So I understand what you're saying there a bit.
Okay. And when did you start using these forums, and when did you become an admin in the in Celistan group?
That like I mentioned a little bit before, that mostly happened last year after the banning of the largest incel subreddit, and so I just started making vlogs. Before the Manasseh attack, I started making vlogs. I started creating that forum. Just doing a bunch of stuff out in public that where I was just sort of telling the world my story and the story of other people, and bringing people together. And it's Yeah, it's mostly just been in the last 5 or 6 months.
Okay. And what is your opinion about how the media has covered Alec Minassian's crime and Elliot Rodgers and all the conflating and what's your opinion about how they've covered this whole thing?
Well, that's interesting. The way that it covered, the first guy was Sodini, which was in 2009. He shot up a gym.
Yeah.
The media covered him in a pretty unbiased way, because his personality, his demeanor was pretty normal. Like, he didn't have this like weird grandiose personality that Roger had. He seemed like a normal guy who was just a tiny bit angry from his romantic failures, and so there was nothing to really for the media to latch onto and sort of make fun of him on a personality basis. So it was pretty unbiased reporting as far as Sodini went, and then there was a lot of sort of, I think, genuine and interesting discussion that went on in blogs around that time, 2009, about Sodini, because he wasn't this like crazy. He didn't have this crazy, disgusting personality that, at least that he showed other people. He might have had it in private. So that the media was pretty fair towards him. The guy after him, Elliot Rodgers, was in my opinion, a very disgusting personality. And you might have seen his vlogs on YouTube. Very
Well,
grandiose,
I
very
tried to read his manifesto. I think I read about 70 to 80% of it before I got bored because it was very long.
yeah, very long. Yeah.
Yeah.
I haven't read it. I found his I think what happened with him was that near the end of his life, he decided to sort of become everything that people saw him as. He decided to sort of, a lot of guys I know that become ostracized, they decide to sort of identify as like the horrible people society sees them as. So they start googling like Nazi anime, and they start getting into like really sort of taboo, uh like sort of weird hobbies and stuff like that. And that's exactly what happened to Elliot Rodger. He just sort of became a really gross person. His gross personality sort of accelerated the more that he thought he was sort of rejected from the world. And it's hard for me to sympathize with Roger, because he had a lot of opportunity, and um, he just was not a likable personality. Like, I would not want to be his friend. So it was just hard for me to sympathize with him, um, or to identify with him that much. And the media, their coverage of him was very scarce. Like, they didn't actually go into his life all that much. They just sort of wanted to ignore it. And they did some in America. They did some interviews with his family, and you sort of use his family as media material instead of his like manifesto. I think the media just saw it as like an embarrassing. They just didn't want it, or too taboo to talk about the stuff that he wrote. And then after Rogers, there was Manassian, like you brought up, which was last year, and the media just went hysterical, really, with Manassian. Like, they just used that as an opportunity to sort of vent
Yeah.
about what they felt about the current incel communities, and it wasn't all. It wasn't what their portrayal of the incel communities and the tone that they used. I said hysterical, but it makes sense because the largest incel forums out there, like incels.me, are not properly moderated. Like they are really gross sites, and they do say a lot of really gross things, and it's mostly trolling and a lot of not that many genuine people on there. So I understand having a violent reaction to those forums, which the media did. So I can't really blame them for having a violent reaction to it. But yeah, they chose to entirely ignore Manassian's like problems, which were like autism
Yeah.
and like mental. I don't even know his whole story because I never found an accurate description of what it was.
Well, that's what I was going to say. They haven't actually given him a good going over in terms of who he was properly. I haven't seen any real, proper journalism into him, all different sides of him. Compared to Elliot Rodger, for example. I mean, Elliot Rodger made it easy because he wrote a manifesto, but this guy, I still don't really know enough about him to sort of.
I know the only thing that I know is that he went around. He was in special needs school, and that people knew him as a guy that would go around making cat noises and like meowing. So I think his cognitive abilities were low, or his social abilities were very low. So he was a. All of these incel shooters have been very different as far as personality goes.
Yes,
Yeah,
that's true. They have all been you're right, they have been very different. And what's the thing about Elliot Rodger is I found him quite fascinating because he obviously was articulate and intelligent. Um, and I also, not that bad looking.
no,
So you're gonna say, oh, he's an incel. Well, like compared to Alec Minassian or other guys who I would say are on the kind of, the special needs and learning disabilities crowd. Elliot Rodger doesn't look like that, at least, even though he might have been in that terms of his mental ability or his, because he did have some issues as well. But he seemed like someone who, in theory, should be able to get along. But as someone who has been interested in psychotherapy and studied it in the past, um, I did notice some red flags in terms of how he was brought up. His dad seemed to be obsessed with his career. His dad's in the film industry. That's not exactly promoting. That's naturally going to be more narcissistic than other areas. He came from a broken family. We don't really know the truth about how his mother was treating him. That things like that, and he obviously had a high degree of narcissism going on. Um, and I do think that some people do respond in a way where they just go, "Fuck it, I'm just going to become that bad guy that you all want me to be." Um, there may have been a sort of a period where he he was looking for um, s- something to make him want to be better or act better or not be that narcissistic. But he didn't find it, or if he did, he rejected it. Um, so I found his case really fascinating. But with Alec Minassian, to be honest, it just pissed me off when I saw the coverage of him. I just thought, you guys, this guy's killed all these people, which is horrible. Okay, and I'm not apologizing for that. But the way you are now using it to attack the whole community, that oh, I don't know what's going on there. You still there? Hello?
hello.
Oh, there was a bit of weird whistling sound there. I don't know if you could hear what I was saying.
Oh no, I could hear you. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, and trying to sort of portray this community as just, I don't know, in a just demonize it in a way and not really try to understand it properly. Um, I My response was to say, look, guys in this community are more likely to go and kill themselves than they are to kill anyone else.
Yeah, and all these murders have been murder suicides or attempted murder suicides. Manassian asked a cop to shoot him after he did his thing. So yeah, that's a. I mean, I can't. I'll let you like finish your thought, but I can't apologize for the state of the incel communities right now. They are pretty bad. But anyway, what were you saying?
Yeah, well, we'll go to that now. I was just going to say that um, it's you know that if it's being portrayed as this horrible hatred of women, then that's the origin of the community, and no one seems to be really trying to understand how they got to that place in the first place. Because who suggests that we suddenly have a percentage of young men who just hate women out of nowhere and they don't have any kind of reasons why they got there, or at least entertain thoughts of having resentment against women, or at least women in their own lives. Um, I'm not convinced that most guys in the community hate women at all. I think that they go through, a temporary period of anger, and then they sort of vent that and process that by talking about it online. And I made this comparison before where I said how I have a very toxic mother who I don't talk to. She was quite emotionally abusive to me. She's not in my life, and I went through a stage where she said something to me that really triggered me. Um, because out of everything that we had gone through in our personal family situation, it was just so vindictive that it was not needed. And I was so angry about it. For about a year, I used to have all sorts of thoughts where I just thought, oh, wouldn't it be good if someone just ran her over one day? Or wouldn't it be good if she just turned up like penniless and homeless at my house and I could slam the door in her face? Or any kind of uh, retribution against her.
Yeah,
I never thought to myself, "Oh, I'd love to kill her," or "I'd love to run her over" myself. But the idea, I was so rageful and so obsessed for a period of time with just seeing her suffer, and then eventually I moved on. Yeah.
yeah,
Um, and I thought to myself, well, if I can do that, why wouldn't guys who are, responding to different scenarios in their lives and seeing that they are not the most attractive guys, and there's various reasons why they're an incel or whatever, why wouldn't they have a temporary period where they are acting out mentally? And these days everyone does everything on the internet. And in fact, in the past, when I had extensive therapy, um, I used to talk on anonymous mental health forums, just not necessarily about my mother, but just about things that I would never say to people in real life.
sure.
So I don't see how it's any different. Would you say that that is a fair comparison, or is it different?
The comparison between how you thought about your mother and how incels are thinking about women.
Yeah.
Well, you brought it up as a temporary thing. The thing about the incels that I've met, I don't really see a romantic future for a lot of them. So I don't know if they're ever going to get out of the situation that they're in ever. And
So the anger is temporary.
is the anger just temporary? I don't know. I honestly, because I've just started in this community, I don't know how long people stay in these communities. I know that there are some like long-term members that exist and that have stayed hateful for many, many years. Here's what I can say about violence and attitudes towards violence. I do know that it's my understanding as a man and as someone who has watched world events that men who don't have a sexual outlet r- other than simulating sex do develop violent thoughts, and that is something I think pretty universal, and I think
Mm,
it might be part of male biology. So, we as a society, we can sort of try to see if that's a real thing, or we could just try our best to deny that and sort of pretend it's not there. And I think one problem society might have with thinking about it that way is that, well, if it is true that men become think super violently if they don't receive sexual gratification, that seems like emotional blackmail on men's part to sort of say that like we're going to develop violent thoughts unless you show a sexual interest towards us. But at the same time, I think it's just a biological fact that men behave this way. So there's been a lot of thought going on to how to suppress that, maybe with SSRIs or with uh, sort of anti-rape training in school, or uh, like sort of pretending that men and women are the same, sort
Mhm.
of at a sexual level. um, that like men don't desire sex more than women do at the age of 18, or just stuff that doesn't make sense to me. So, what do you think about that? What I'm like, what do you think about? Do you think it's true that men, if they do not receive sexual gratification for a very, very long time, that they naturally develop feelings of violence, or do you think this is a social construct?
Um, I think that I think there's definitely some truth to that. I don't have any, as a woman, I don't have any experience with that exactly, but just from talking to guys and observing, how certain guys are compared to others, I think there's definitely some truth to that.
Or maybe not just violence, but violence plus either violence or feeling like you want to rape someone. So rape, for example, is very common in the animal kingdom, right? As soon as
Mm.
we try to think about it in the human sphere, I don't think that we're necessarily honest about where it comes from. Like a lot of people try to think of rape as, I'm not an expert on rape. I think I'd be better to talk to a feminist about that. But I
They're
think,
not an expert
yeah,
either.
yeah.
Mm.
So I mean, my general feeling about it is that a lot of it does come from guys who just simply want to get their rocks off, and not necessarily a display, just a mere display of power. Um, and a lot of feminists don't like that description of how rape can operate. That rape could operate just purely um, as a carnal instinct to get your rocks off, and not the feminists like to think of rape as just sort of a
It's a
display of male power to dominate women.
Yeah, that's it. They don't include the kind of biological need for sex in their theory.
Right,
They
and
ignore it.
yeah, so I mean, there is a debate to be had about how much men actually feel like they need sex, and how much of that is a social construct. But yeah, I think that I would lean on the side of it being sort of hardwired into male biology to feel like we like sort of like a to think of sex as sort of we experience in sort of we experience it as sort of like food, sort of.
Well,
Yeah.
it's the motivation for you guys to be productive individuals. I mean, it's hardwired into our humanity. I completely respect that in the sense that as you said before, women are the choosers, women are the gatekeepers, and we women are saying, hey, you're acceptable, you're not, um,
Yeah, and I
and
think there's
it's
some.
up
Go
to
ahead,
the
yeah.
guys to, and so therefore it makes, if we think about it in a biological that guys are wired that way, are they going to be motivated to impress the females and to keep humanity going? I mean, if they didn't have that drive, then we wouldn't be here. So I don't
Yeah,
get
well, I think some feminists might say that, well, now our
men
job is
about
to make women just as sort of to make women sexually aggressive too. So if men aren't going to be as sexually aggressive, if we're going to put men on a bunch of SSRIs, and if we're going to tell men that they shouldn't think of they shouldn't sort of exercise their sort of carnal instincts and pursue women a whole bunch for fear of whatever. Uh,
That's
that
what yeah, I'm glad that you want to bring that up. So what feminists have been doing is saying, yeah, guys, we want to neuter you, and we want to dampen your drive for sexuality, right?
yeah, yeah,
But they're not telling women. There's actually a bit of a split in the feminist community. On the one hand, you've got sex positive feminism, which says, go out there and sleep with many guys as you want, and it's up to you. You're an empowered woman. And then there's the other side, which is quite puritanical, and it still expects men to have that chivalrous drive to be approaching and impressing women in the way that we've always been. Um,
yeah.
and tells women they don't need, basically says to women they don't really need to change. They don't really need to do anything different to how they are now, on this particular area. And so when you do that, um, you've got a bunch of women who are maybe disappointed that guys are not approaching them enough.
Yeah.
And then you've got what has also been happening is where they will think, okay, well, who are the guys that I actually want to be with? And they're just going to try and go for them. And then we start talking about red pill theory and 80-20 rule, and the chads and the jocks get
Yeah,
all the girls.
yeah,
And no one into the girls. Look, if you want a good guy, you want to have a meaningful relationship, you want to get married and settle down with someone, then you need to meet these guys halfway and give them the opportunities to develop, and they need to be able to at least socialize with them. Yeah. And the one of the criticisms that I've seen so much in some of the Facebook groups and forums and things, they say is women and guys saying, "Oh, it's not up to women to get these guys up to scratch. It's up to the guys." And I'm like, but we've taken away all the male spaces where they traditionally did that, and actually, it's up to everyone, isn't it? I don't know why are we telling them that it's only up to them, that women have no responsibility in it
well, yeah, and
whatsoever.
also the advice they have to men just doesn't work empirically. So what they're telling men to do is to go into therapy, and therefore that will cure your confidence, and therefore that will make you better around women. All of these incel shooters were in massive amounts of therapy, massive amounts of psychiatric
Yeah,
drugging. It did not improve
glad
their
you've met.
chances with women. Same thing with me. I've been drugged so much. I'm like it's crazy how much I've been drugged through psychiatry, and it all started because I couldn't meet up with women, basically. But the psychiatric, when I first saw a psychiatrist, he basically said, "You're shy. This is what we're gonna do," and then after that came all the drugging. So, yeah, the advice that they're giving to guys just isn't working. So if feminists want to say it's on guys to change, they have to at least offer something that'll work, right? Because the stuff that
Yeah.
they're offering doesn't work.
And that's what I said before, when I said all the advice that guys get on how to self-actualize is mostly bunk. It doesn't work. It's not working in our current environment for sure. They say, oh, just be yourself. You'll meet the right person eventually. Don't, you can get therapy. You can do this, and it's like, well, you're basically like, you're in a good example because you're 27. I would say that you're at the age now where your luck is going to change, right? You've also taken on a risk, which is and something that's naturally men have had to do to prove their manhood. They take on something that's risky, and that's how they develop. Yeah. Um. So we've removed all these opportunities for guys to develop risk in their teenage years, and so they're now having to do it later, which is why when I have spoken to young guys recently, I say to them, look, if you become fairly successful um, in a job or whatever, and then by the time you're in your 30s, really, you will find someone. but why should they have to wait until they're in their 30s? And it's not very, it's just not realistic. And I can see that that is why a whole cohort of guys will gather in those 10 years between 18 and 28 or whatever, and just sort of despair at the fact that they're going through this. It's just not realistic. It can't continue. And then you've got the girls on the other side who are, you know, they're either not dating, or they're only dating a small amount of guys. Or if they are dating guys, there's a guy I spoke to recently, he was, say, about 22, and he doesn't have a problem. He actually has developed a good way of sleeping around. He has game, I guess,
Yeah,
right? And
yeah.
so he said that he can have a one night stand anytime, really. He knows how to do it. But he says that that doesn't satisfy him. He actually wants a meaningful relationship. He'd love to have a meaningful relationship with someone. And he's tried to do that, and they just constantly say, "Oh, I'm not interested." Or they'll
Yeah, and
say,
we
"Well, they
actually
won't
see
do
that.
that to us."
We actually see that in our forum too. So like I said, the forum that I run, we let women in, and some women actually like have like this charitable attitude towards us, and will actually like some girls have like started dating the guys in the group, and have started like reaching out to the guys on like a romantic or sexual level. One of the guys who paired up in our group, he the girl would only come to him for sex like once a month, and he was like, "What the fuck? Like I'm looking for a meaningful relationship." And now part of that is probably because the word incel isn't a great word because it only implies that we're looking for a sexual relationship and not romantic. So maybe the girls that come into our communities think, okay, all these guys need is sex and not necessarily romantic companionship either. But yeah, even the guys that have been successful in my forum, they've only been successful on the sexual level, not the romantic or the like pair bonding aspect. I think I've noticed I don't know how to describe on a societal wide level why women aren't, as interested as they were before in pair bonding, except for maybe economic reasons, and so
Well, I'm biased. I'm gonna say that feminist cultural influence has basically been telling women and their previous generations, so our mothers and our fathers are telling us, "Go and concentrate and you'll think about that stuff until you're, 28 or 30." Yeah, because it is easier for most men to get laid, they can spend their time dating around up until that point. And I legal theory stuff on hypogamy. Sometimes it's spoken about crudely, and then it gets misconstrued. You get all these kind of pigtail radical midtail guys going, female nature is evil and blah blah blah. But generally, they have it right in the sense that that is what's going on, and I fully try and talk about it with women and say, look, it's not as you. I'm saying that feminism has inflated this behavior that's always been around and has kept humanity surviving. But our social construct has completely changed. We were expected in the past to meet guys, after college or just before college, pair up, get married before the age of 25, and now we're being told the opposite. And then there's other messaging happening where we're being told not to have children at all. um, there's a whole kind of misconnection going on. um, and I'm not blaming it all on the girls at all. I'm just saying that the messaging they're getting is that these guys will be okay, um, just sort of wandering around in the wilderness, wondering why no one wants to have a relationship with them. And obviously they're not. If these communities are growing, especially the fact that you've got the most vulnerable guys, the guys who have got learning disabilities or autism, or guys who've had to take lots of medication. They've got their guys who are vulnerable anyway, And then you've got guys who are kind of more, who are, I would say, not normal, but at least higher up in the pecking order, who, as I said to you earlier, are talking to me saying, you know, I can get laid. I've got a fairly okay job, but no one's interested in having a meaningful relationship with me. I can, you know, and in fact, I might even start talking about it in one of the, even though I might not be seen as, you know, traditionally what an incel is, like what an incel is, or a guy who isn't very attractive in general. Um, you know, it's a whole mixture of different issues going on,
Yeah,
but
well, that's
I
interesting.
that we're just in a bit of a temporary, because it can't continue this way. There's no way that this social situation can continue, but we're in a temporary kind of disconnect between the sexes that people actually want, and what's happening. Yeah,
Yeah.
sorry, go on.
What you brought up for a bit there about guys who are successful in their life as far as like money and maybe even looks, and then going out and not being able to find a romantic partner. That to me is always interesting because these are men who have met society's sort of standards for what they should do to get a partner, to find a partner, and maybe they don't even have a bad personality. And the first person that comes to my mind is maybe Sodini, who had a house, he had $250,000. I watched his vlogs before they got taken down. His personality didn't seem terrible. Maybe he was bad around women, and I just didn't see it. And, uh, I mean, I didn't resonate with the violence that he did, but I sort of resonated with the frustration of putting a lot of effort into sort of the things that bring you to a point where you can have a partner and then finding no avenue to find a partner. So for example, like last year I was in a very good place financially. I had a job and I was working and had my own apartment, all that stuff. And I felt like I'm doing all this stuff that would be great for having a relationship. And then as soon as I try to find a way to get into a relationship, there's just like a silence. So I go on to OkCupid or Tinder or whatever, and there's just like no interest whatsoever from the opposite gender. I think maybe on it's just interesting to me how even men who, like you said before, who are successful can get into this spot where they aren't finding a relationship. So that to me is
Mhm.
just interesting.
Yeah, and I think the communities overlap because I say that there's always going to be who are not successful at reproduction for various reasons, and they've always existed. You know, in the past they may have become monks, or like, for example, an example I thought of was, this is just but like in Game of Thrones, you've got all the guys protecting the wall. Yeah,
Yeah.
there's a reason why they're all there. I mean, Jon Snow is a bit of an anomaly, of course, but everyone else is like, well, they were ostracized, or there was a reason that they weren't meeting other societal expectations and requirements in other ways. So they all became, they had a place to become a knight of the wall. Yeah, and it's like we used to accept that there was a small percentage of guys in that would need somewhere, some kind of meaningful position in society. And it seems like now, ironically, as much as feminism is saying to women, you know, you don't need to only be in life, you can be whatever you want and you can compete with men in, you know, in careers and things like that. But what we've actually kind of done is said to guys, there isn't anywhere else for you except, you know, just meeting the expectations of women. There isn't really another way for them to self-actualize anymore. And I think the MGTOW community recognize that. That's why they have the whole thing of calling themselves men going their own way. And
Yeah.
I'm curious to know what you think about them, because they are trying, or to say, look, stop basing your motivation in life on trying to attract women or have a relationship with women.
Well,
Try,
yeah.
be yourself.
Well, I first of all,
Yeah, go on.
I identify with the MGTOWs on some fundamental level where I understand how you might not want to make every major life decision based on pleasing women, and that you can make life decisions that are societally acceptable and that are fine, but they're not necessarily geared towards attracting women. For example, if you're going to pick a musical instrument, there's some musical instruments that you can pick that women are going to like go crazy over you for, right? So if you're in school and you have to pick a musical instrument, you could pick the guitar, or you could pick drums. Those are I knew of guys who in school would pick those specifically so that women would be interested in them. Or you could pick the instrument that you find the most interesting, which might not be the guitar or might not be the drums. So I sympathize with the MGTOW's sort of worldview, which is like don't base every decision you make on pleasing women. Don't like debase yourself. Like where if you don't want to play guitar, you don't have to play guitar. You can play the flute, whatever, or drums
Mm,
or whatever. So I get that part of MGTOW. Like appreciate that. What I don't appreciate about the MGTOW community is that they seem to have a very rigid political worldview. So I've been sort of banned from their forums because I didn't sort of fit whatever political ideology they had at the time.
mm,
And they're
mm,
more so than the incels. They do have a very libertarian, very rigid sort of political worldview, which is fine. But it's just not something that I fit into. The MGTOWs, the sort of joke that incels say about the MGTOWs is that they're incels in denial, and we would usually say that they are, if they had the opportunities to be with women, they would be with women, and that might not necessarily be true for all of them. For some of them, they actually did get out of horrible relationships, and they just genuinely don't want to be in a relationship again because they consider the way that relationships work today to be too toxic, and they got screwed over in family court or whatever. But a lot of them are younger guys who probably just had no success with women and are simply writing them off and sort of going on a sex strike when number one, male sex strikes don't really work in my opinion, and number two, uh, I mean, if they had an opportunity to be with women, I think they would be, and they'd scrap the whole MGTOW thing. So that's the general like attitude that we have towards MGTOWs. Now you brought up earlier how like there could be some value in MGTOW where there should be like avenues for men to operate in society when they don't meet standards that society should set for reproduction. And I just say I could just say I don't necessarily have an opinion on that because we would have to come up with what those standards are,
mm.
right? So like right now, maybe hypergamy is acting as like a eugenics program. But if we were to develop our own like set of standards as to who should reproduce, that would be something other than just like sort of this primal hypergamy among women, and we'd have to agree on what that is. So I don't know what that should be, but I assume it would be like some sort of standard about how much money you're making or how I don't know what that would be, but we would have to agree on that. So it's hard for me to sort of go come on board with this sort of set of standards that some men should reproduce and other men shouldn't. It's
Well,
just hard for me.
I know I'm quite libertarian in a lot of ways, and I don't agree. I wouldn't try and list that. Um, my point is that any kind of male dominated environments these days are demonized and feminists try to shut them down. Um, so I guess my answer would be that we need to recognize that these kind of environments, these kind of groups should exist. And there's a place there's a reason why they existed. And we shouldn't be trying to shut them down.
Yeah, I'm
Um,
curious. I'm curious of an example of what one of those male spaces are, because you mentioned that a few times so far in this discussion. I wasn't exactly so sure what you were talking about, as far as a male space,
well,
a traditional
I
male space that
suppose
you.
an example. One example could be like the Boy Scouts, for example. Now that no longer exists, it's going to be mixed.
Oh, okay,
Um,
right, okay.
And in the past, we had the clergy and religious institutions that were mostly men. They were all men. and now they have females involved. Now, I'm not saying that we should go back to that, but what I'm saying is that the attitude that an all male dominated environment is inherently bad is something we should be questioning. You know, it's kind of like we are threatened when these exist, and I just think there's always been a need for them.
Okay,
You can't
that's
even
interesting. I think, yeah.
can't even have a men's club anymore without it being attacked. Yeah, because it's discriminatory or whatever. Um,
Ye-
you know, we used
I,
to,
yeah.
at least in the UK, for example, used to have gentlemen's working clubs, and men could go and socialize in them, full of incels. I'm just saying that the attitude to uh, a group or a common interest that is male dominated and excludes females is hostile now, and I think that would help this situation. I don't know if you agree with me, but
Well, that's interesting because you seem to have a sort of masculinist perspective towards this scenario. I know a lot of people that think that the incel phenomenon is born from a failure of masculinity, and that seems to be sort of something that you're getting at. Where if we could sort of
no,
restore
no.
masculinity, that would,
Oh,
um,
okay. So you mean a failure of masculinity being actualized in society, or a
yeah.
failure of men being adequately masculine? Which
It sounds like that's what you were getting at, like a failure of masculinity being actualized in society is causing
yeah,
things so far.
that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about it. It's on a wider level than just letting guys convene in groups and leaving them alone. All the kind of traits, natural traits that of masculinity are being attacked on a routine basis, in my opinion.
Yeah, so
Um,
I hear that a lot from the masculinist sort of sect of MRAs. I wouldn't say like all MRAs are like in that sect. And I hear that also a lot from neo-reactionaries, specifically neo-reactionary women who,
mm,
yeah, they would say that we want to, I'm not saying this is exactly what you would propose, but they would say that what we want is to go back to, not go back, we'll sort of either go back or create a new system where men are working harder to prove themselves to women, and women are still acting as the selectors, and men need to sort of really put more effort into peacocking and displaying
no,
themselves to women.
I'm not. I'm not specifically. Okay, I'm more egalitarian in my view. I think that in the past, this is what I think people get mixed up when they're talking about. Let's go back to traditionalism and what you were just saying. Um, I'm not necessarily talking about the traditional view where men are, doing these masculine activities, and we're going to go back to that. What I mean is, in my view, in the past, there was more of a respect for different kinds of masculinity. Yeah. So we hear this rhetoric that men can't express their feelings, which I think is rubbish.
Wait,
They're
sorry,
not
you said it was rubbish. That what? Say that again.
this view that men have, due to patriarchal attitudes throughout the last 100 years, men they need to be able to open up and express their feelings, that sort of thing. Toxic masculinity, and
You think
I
it's rubbish that they should be able to do that, or they're not able to do that because of patriarchy,
I
or that
think
they're
it's
not able to do that. Period.
no, I don't agree that they're not able to do that. And I don't agree with the opinion that they have never been able to do that from a historical perspective. We used to have more of a respect for different kinds of masculinity in the past compared to now, which is ironic considering all the different identity politics stuff to do with gender fluid and trans and all that. So, for example, in the past, if a man was into performing arts, he was expressing himself. He was writing poetry, he plays, and he was expressing himself, he was still quite masculine in the sense that he was self-actualizing and taking risks in not in a different way to women do. But he wasn't traditionally macho or traditionally masculine in strong. He may have been physically different. He may be physically slimmer, or he might be more of a thespian. Yeah,
Yeah.
but he was still viewed as a man. He still had masculine attributes that he displayed, but it was just a different. He was just a unique individual, and he expressed them in a different way. What we've got now is we've actually got very rigid views, and even though the feminists are saying, get toxic masculinity is a problem and macho-ness is a problem, and it's like saying that all men try to aspire to that in the past. I don't actually think they did. They, in the past, they aspired to be providers, yes, masculine in the way that they got there, in their risk-taking attitudes, but they weren't all trying to be alpha males, for example. They weren't all trying to hit it up in the gym and have six packs, right?
Yeah.
There was more of a respect for different kinds of men as unique individuals, because they, even though you had, say, a physicist over here and a guy in the military over there, they were still both respected as men and as their own version of masculinity. Whereas now we've actually got a rigid view of what masculinity is, and we're told that it's bad, right? And actually everyone else is then like, okay, well, if I'm not masculine in that kind of way, that means I must be gender fluid, or that means I must be trans, or that means that I'm a complete and utter failure. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I know. I
So
get. I see what you're getting at. Yeah.
I'm
Um.
not a traditionalist in the way that some people you were mentioning before. And I think that's another a mix up that's going on as well with the people that are promoting traditionalism. Um, it's being received as, if you are not a gun tooting, this is an American stereotype, right? Kind of built, um, physically strong man who's gonna, you know, um, I don't know. I'm trying to think of some more stereotypes of
Uh.
a
So in America, in America, the masculine sort of stereotype would be, yeah, different in other countries. Here it definitely would be involving like more like a muscular frame, like a
yeah,
bigger frame, a very extroverted personality, very sort of salesman like personality. You know.
yeah, an extrovert, I guess. If you don't fit those ideals, then you're not a traditional male. Well, actually, no. Traditionalism in the past was just literally that the man was the provider, not like the main provider, because there also is a myth that women didn't work in the past, and women of lower classes have always worked outside the home. Maybe not as much as men, but they have. So that's a bit of a myth. But they they may not have been able they may not have fitted that ideal, but they were still respected, and they still, as a man, and they still had masculine attributes to them. But they were, they were an individual, they were their own person. And we've actually gone the opposite, where we've now got this very rigid view of what masculinity is. And now I'm starting to sound like some feminist, but it's a really mixed up and confused way of looking at men.
Yeah,
Um,
I know that there's a lot of different opinions and a lot of different ways to approach masculinity from both an MRA and a feminist perspective, and it's not the MRA community, from what I can tell, because I've been sort of l- a wallflower in those groups. There
mm,
isn't a sort of consensus about whether or not we should like reinstitute a proper form of masculinity, or whether or not we should tear it down altogether in the form of gender liberation, because there definitely was a section, a group of MRAs in the 60s and 70s who um, liked the idea of male gender liberation in a way that women viewed female gender liberation, where
Yeah.
men are not necessarily reaffirming their roles as breadwinners, but are instead becoming like stay-at-home dads, like that sort of male gender liberation. So I think in the MRA community, there's just different views about how men should go about how society should like how men should like if masculinity should be reaffirmed or just torn down. But like I'm looking right now at the Wikipedia definition of masculinity, which has courage, independence, violence, and assertiveness. And so I'd say feminists would say like violence. That's an example of like toxic masculinity, and they would say that maybe like excessive assertiveness in the form of extreme aggression is toxic masculinity. Like I sympathize with that feminist analysis because and it's also sort of an MRA analysis as well. At least it was a few decades ago. So I might not share your worldview exactly. But it just depends. It depends on what sort of on what you see as the solution to if the incel problem. If you see the solution to the incel problem as women sort of if you see the solution to the incel problem as women becoming more sexually aggressive, you probably would not identify with your worldview and your solution. If you see the solution as men, instead as men uh, reasserting their masculinity in society and society building back traditional male spaces, that's a different way to approach it. I mean I sympathize more with maybe the feminist and the like liberal MRA solution, which is to somehow find a way to make women more sexually aggressive, and we don't necessarily have to reassert masculinity in the public sphere. So I would be just fine with men becoming more feminized and with women uh, sort of becoming more sexually aggressive. I don't know if that's possible. It might be that's completely impossible. But that
Well, no,
I'd be fine with that.
kind of, I kind of, um, I kind of agree with you. That's why I'm saying to you that even though I recognise that most people in Women Against Feminism group in our Facebook group, our stance is that we think that most people want traditional setups in terms of gender roles, but um, we don't think that society should be promoting an authoritarian view about it. We shouldn't be saying, you know, your role is so rigid, you should be that, and your role is so rigid, you should be that. We think that what feminism is doing to women is saying that they have no responsibility at all in any of it. So all that feminism is doing is saying, men, you've got toxic masculinity. Men, you need to change. Men, you need to do this. Men, and they're not. The women are not being asked to make any real changes at all. And the only way it'll work from their point of view is for women to step up and take responsibility and to have some agency in all of this and to become more sexually aggressive, or at least, sorry, a better way of putting it is to ask guys out more often and to start putting themselves forwards and to start taking on some of the risk that guys have always traditionally done. That's the only way you're going to have any egalitarian meeting in the middle position. And they're not saying that to women. They are just saying to women that it's all up to men to change, and the women don't need to do anything.
Right, and a lot of that is
Um,
based off of the idea that women can have a happy and successful life as a cat lady well into their and that like maybe like 40% of women can be fine with that. I don't know, maybe that's true. Maybe women can sort of live without men and
I think personally, I think that women suffer more by not being able to be with men than the opposite. Even though we do have obviously we have the incels community and that are majority men, but I do think that it affects women more, at least if you speak to a bunch of women over the age of say 45 to 50 who haven't managed to uh, settle down and have a life with a man, they seem to suffer more, in my opinion. Because I think by the time a lot of the guys who are become like lifelong bachelors reach that point, they're okay with it. That's my perception anyway. I could be wrong,
And
but
that's probably that could probably be chalked up to women losing their fertility at an earlier age than men.
yeah.
So yeah, that no, I understand that. Yeah, I think that there's a lot of there's probably some disagreements in the MRA community about, and it's definitely in the incel community about how feminized men can or should be in the future. So, I don't I'm not a good representative of probably most, like, hardcore self-described incels. I'm not the best representative of them in terms of, attitudes towards men being feminized. So most incels have a very masculinist worldview. They
Mm.
want to see men more masculine, and they really hate the idea of men becoming more feminized. There's a very popular meme right now circulating in the incel forums that sort of makes fun of feminized men and has sort of caricatured them as right now. The caricature is it doesn't make any sense right now, but the image is of a man with a his mouth wide open and with a large beard. Have you ever seen that meme going around? Maybe not.
No, but if you could send it to me, I'll be
But
interested to see
yeah,
it. But
so the
imagine, I
yeah,
can imagine.
the pejorative, right now is called, new male, like a man that has, or soy boy, different, like, pejoratives that, our community has given to men who have become, feminized because of feminism, and we use those pejoratives to, sort of insult men who have become more feminized. So that is a dynamic that's going on in, both the incel and the MRA communities.
Yes, I've seen that, and I laugh along with it sometimes in terms of this soy boy thing. But it's only the only times I find intense amusement is when you see a guy who is not accurate being congruent and not accurately representing themselves. So they're a guy that is probably a little bit more masculine in some ways, but is deliberately becoming a soy boy to please feminists.
Yeah, that
Um,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
so I don't find amusement when I see a guy who is naturally what you might say a soy boy, and is just being himself. I don't find amusement out of that. I'm just like, well, that guy's just how he is. Like, I'm not hating on him. It's when it's guys who are a little bit more masculine in some of the stereotypical ways, who are deliberately dumbing it down and neutering themselves and saying, I'm a soy boy, look at me, you know, I'm fitting in with what feminists want. And I'm like, well, no, you're not being yourself. Um,
Yeah, especially if they try to sort of deny, sort of like testosterone and male sexuality in general. Like I would even take offense at that. So guys that come into our community and say, "Hey, men, they're not sexual. They're not as sexual as you think that they are, and men can just sort of go 40 years as a virgin, no problem. It's not a big problem." Yeah, then I laugh at sort of like the soy boy memes that get posted underneath that person that makes that opinion. So yeah,
like I think a good example of what I was saying before, and maybe what you're referring to, is think of someone like Prince. You know who Prince is, right? He died last year or the year before.
yeah, yeah,
The musical artist. He is, in my opinion, he was extremely masculine in the sense that he was straight and he obviously with women. I mean, obviously, he didn't seem to be unsettled about his sexuality, but the way he expressed himself, he was an artist. He was creative. He dressed in in certain feminized ways, and he was quite feminine looking. He would wear flamboyant clothes. He might wear makeup, but I still viewed him as unquestionably masculine. And the same thing with David Bowie. I viewed him as masculine too, because there was something about the way he expressed himself that to me made me think, yeah, you're someone that is not afraid of being courageous and being and taking a risk in certain in ways that manhood have always been tested. But you're not traditionally masculine in the way that you know you're quite slim, you wear makeup, you dress up as different characters, and that sort of thing. And now people seem to think that if they have a tendency to want to do that, or if that's their where they express themselves creatively, that they need to then say that they're gender fluid or they're trans. You know, there's a whole conversation and whole thing going on about that now. So that's where I was saying that actually masculinity has become really rigid compared to what it used to be, even though we're having all these conversations about what masculinity is and what men are and all that all the time. And it's like, we never used to have this problem. We just used to accept men as the way they were, and they did have certain responsibilities in society, but then so did women.
Here's something interesting. Like you just brought up the word responsibility. So one thing that's a part of the incel community now that didn't used to be part of the incel community is sort of making fun of men who are taking up traditional male responsibilities um, when they don't have a romantic partner. And so the word that we use for that is I don't necessarily use this word always, but the word that the incels would use is wage cuck. So what you're doing is uh, the, the idea is that you're a wage slave, but you're a wage slave for no reason because you're not raising a family, you're not supporting a wife. So there is this sort of gender liberationist tendency now in the incel community to sort of make fun of men who are taking up these traditional male responsibilities for no apparent reason. And it might be counter to your worldview of men taking up male responsibilities and that being a good thing in and of itself. So incels would say taking up these male responsibilities aren't necessarily good in and of itself.
Mm. Sounds like a fire alarm.
Oh no, something just got done cooking. Anyway, yeah.
All right. Yeah, okay. That's very interesting because that's kind of opposite to the MGTOWs, isn't it?
It is. It
Um,
is. I mean, these are not the same communities. These are completely different.
oh,
No.
no, no. That's what I'm saying. I think there's people that might overlap, but I would say that the communities are completely separate. And this is why media representation is they try to lump them all in together.
Yeah.
Um, and there's a lot of, as I said before, they were saying that women are being told they need to step up and start sleeping with these guys because it's their duty. And as I said, there is a conversation to be had about women's responsibility in all of this, but it isn't that point exactly. It's that feminism and the way that the art economy has changed has meant that women are being asked to do things that they weren't expected to do before, and the feminists are just blaming men when it doesn't happen the way that they want it to. Instead of saying to women, well, if you want things to be this way, then you need to be able to take responsibility too and take on your share. And it's not from a level, it's not because of male entitlement, it's because you're not going to get what you want. Society is not going to be the best if we don't all do this together. So it's being framed in a very one-sided way, in my opinion. So we've been talking for a long time, and I suspected this would happen. Um, I just wanted to ask you: do you have anything else that you want to say before we wrap things up? Because I don't
Uh,
think there's anything else
no.
that I really wanted to bring up, and I would love to talk to you again.
Yeah, we talked about a lot of different things. There wasn't really anything I came here ready. I mean, there's not really anything I came here that I just wanted to get out as like a public statement or anything. So, I
Yeah.
was just sort of just a conversation. So, yeah, nothing really. I'm also not really advertising myself or the forum. I'm not really looking for new forum members, but if anyone does want to find us, they can find us at Incelistan, which is INCELISTAN on Facebook. If you want to join, we're not really looking to increase our membership, but that's where we are.
Yeah, you said that once you get to a certain number, you keep getting shut down. And what is the repeated pattern with that? Why does that keep happening?
Usually because well, we have sort of a laissez-faire posting policy. We just let people post whatever they want. So there is some small amount of man hating and woman hating going on in the group, and
Right.
we're still trying to figure out how to deal with that and still let people have freedom of speech. So that's we usually get shut down over something related to that.
Okay. Well, I guess you can go and check out this group if you're interested, guys and girls. And don't be offended if you don't get let in, because as you said, he keeps getting shut down after a certain amount of numbers. But I'm sure it'll be fine if you are interested in finding out a bit more. I hope this conversation has been useful for you to find out a little bit more about the Intel community and one guy's view. And thank you so much, William, for talking to me. And if you want to do it again, I'd really like to. We can be more specific next time now that we've kind of got to know each other a bit better.
Yeah,
Would you like
that's
to?
fine. Great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, take care, and yeah, hopefully the media will start to pay attention to all the variable parts within this. But one can only hope.
Yeah, yeah. It was a good conversation, and there is increased media attention right now, and it probably will continue. And I sort of expect this trend of sort of male grievance circles increasing. So, yeah, it was a good conversation. Nice talking to you.
Okay, take care. Bye bye.
Yeah.